Okay, thank you. Can we start with the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would note that we have 11 of our members here physically in Town Hall, and Miriam Cruiser is out of the country and is calling in. Okay. I think the first item is item 2, the election for the vacant vice chair position. Just as a little background, in the previous meeting, Mike Basham had left or left the BET, and we replaced him with Harry Fisher, but we did not replace the vice chair position. Mike Basham was our previous vice chair. So can I get nominations for the vice chair position? I would like to nominate Leslie Tarkington. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Motion by Ozesmir, seconded by Moriarty. Okay. Leslie Tarkington is a long-serving member of the BT. She is currently the Budget Committee Chair, and she has served in that position previously. She has also served in many as committee chairs for many of the other positions, of the other committees.
I guess I should add, Leslie, you're our longest-serving member, I believe, on this board at the moment. You've been involved with seats on almost every committee we have. Certainly work very hard for our board, and I think I support your nomination, or I know I support your nomination for vice chair.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay. Can I call the vote?
Sure. Start with you, Harry Fisher.
Yes.
Stephen Selbst.
Yes.
Bill Drake.
Yes.
Jeff Raymer.
Yes.
Leslie Moriarty.
Yes.
Leslie Tarkington.
Yes.
Dan Ozesmir.
Yes.
Nisha Arora, I'm a yes. David Weisbrod.
Yes.
Karen Fasciolotis.
Yes.
Laura Erickson.
Yes.
And Miriam Cruiser.
No, you can't vote electronically.
Oh, you cannot vote electronic.
Yes, she
Cannot vote
can.
electronic.
Oh, executive.
executive vote.
Sorry.
Okay, yes, so that,
That's 12-0.
that is 12-0. Leslie, congratulations.
Well, thank you. And, I thank all of my BET colleagues for their support, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you and with our chair, Dan Ozesmir, and Nisha Arora, our other officer and chair of our caucus, Leslie Moriarty. So thank you very much.
Okay. Item 3 is a request for budget adjustments. These are all routine applications, so our secretary, Nisha, will read them off.
FT4, which is the fire department transfer of $186,000 to cover overtime and injury expenses. NW1, which is Nathaniel Witherell, $30,000 transfer to cover medical liability costs. And TC2, which is the town clerk, transferring $40,000 to cover department expenses.
Any discussion? Okay. Can I get a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second.
Stephen Spelps and Leslie Tarkington. I'm sorry. Now, any discussion? Okay. Hearing no discussion, can we pass these with unanimous consent?
Yes.
Miriam? Yes. Okay, thank you. That passes 12-0. Item number 4, our Assessors Report. Lauren Elliott. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and fellow members of the BET. I'd like to present the Assessors Report for July 2022. First of all, as you're all aware, our tax bills went out on June 15th, and the Assessor's Office is currently responding to any questions or concerns taxpayers have about their bills. We're adjusting motor vehicles bills as well as answering any inquiries concerning the new assessments from the revaluation. Since the June report, we have added 3 additional seniors and 1 firefighter. Certain seniors are allowed to ask for an extension through either the Office of Policy and Management or, depending upon the local ordinance, if they didn't submit the information to us in a timely fashion, we grant that as an extension. So we've added 3 more seniors and 1 firefighter onto our totals. That differs from what I reported to you back in June. Tomorrow, we actually have a trial. We are trying the residential case from the 2015 grand list. Trials are still remote, so we will be here in the legal department doing it via Zoom or Microsoft Teams, I believe. In addition to that, I also had to change the 2021 grand list. We have an additional 5 commercial appeals that were filed in a timely fashion. We just missed those when I was reporting to you back in June. So we have a total of 49 commercial tax appeals from the 21 grand list and 17 residential, and then the exempt, which is the schools. And so that's a total of 87 tax appeals arising out of the 2021 revaluation. Does anybody have any questions for me this evening?
Yes. On page 2, if I may, of your report, where you're talking about the volunteer firefighter tax exemptions, last year there were 51 applications, and you're showing 38 this year. In your report, you commented that 1 firefighter was accommodated a little bit after the deadline. In years past, there was a volunteer coordinator in the fire department. Was his name Brian Kelly? Do I have that correctly?
Yes, and
Was he working with you annually to arrange these volunteer firefighter filings in the past?
I believe in the ordinance it says that they are supposed to reply to my office by April 1st. They're supposed to give us a listing of all the volunteer firefighters that are eligible for that credit. 1 was missed that we know of, and yes, but we're supposed to get that list in a timely fashion by April 1st. I think it was a little late this year, and obviously we've only seen 1 person come forward that was omitted.
Do you know if there's others?
I don't know.
In the prior years, was Brian Kelly coming into your office to organize these filings with you in
No,
advance?
actually, he would send us via email all of the applications, and then he would also send us a hard copy as well.
Were you receiving a similar sort of arrangement from somebody else at the fire department this year?
I'm not quite sure who sent it to us, but yes, we did receive they were supposed to, the 1-page application as well as a listing from the coordinator.
Through the chair, if I may, I'd like to encourage the liaisons to public safety to touch base with the chief, just to be sure that that piece of it is going smoothly, that we're not going to have an issue with the volunteers. It just troubles me that the number of applicants dropped from 51 to 38. By the way, does the 38 include the 1 additional one?
Yep.
Okay, so it's 38 including the 1 additional one. It seems like that's a fairly large drop of volunteers who are seeking or accepting the tax benefit. I just want to be sure that the volunteers are being well taken care of. I'm just concerned with having a problem later on. And I feel like it's a good item for the liaisons to discuss with the chief if the chair has no objection.
I have no objection. Our next meeting, Dave and I have with...
Microphone.
No objection. Our next meeting is, I believe, July 28th for David and I, with the chief.
Thank you. Nothing else.
So I have I will make a comment here that after our liaison meeting, Jeff and Lauren and I agreed that I would call Charlie Lubawicki, which I have done. And so you should know in advance that at least that initial step was taken. I believe he's the administrative assistant fire chief. So, and then I would like to move that we accept. Oh, I'm sorry.
Laura?
I just had a question. Lauren, I note in your report that we're starting the physical inspections for the 2025 reval, and I just wondered, as a public service, if you could sort of touch on that and let people know what they might expect. Will people be asked to show them indoors, and how does this work?
So the requirement is that we inspect a house once every 10 years. So the way we are doing it now in the office is that I'm going back and looking at all the houses that we inspected between 2010 and 2015, and we're starting with those. And basically what we do is we don't have the ability to make an appointment. We knock on the door. If the property owner is not home, we will measure and verify the information that we can from the outside. If they are home, we request that we do take a walk through if it's amenable to them. They do not have to let us in. They do not have to let us on the property. But we do try to get as much information from them and from that visit as we can. We always have the ability for people to call our office and make an appointment if they don't want us just to come out randomly. We sent out, I believe we sent it out to all the not only the 911 dispatch, but to the selectman's office and everything, that we are out, and where we don't televise exactly where we are for safety concerns and safety reasons, but we do tell the corresponding departments where we are and what we're doing and who's out there. Okay, but as far as property owners, we get the majority of our information from, it's basically measuring the outside of the house. That's the most important, and in verifying the overall, so that would be the overall square footage of the house, and just basically to see if, what work has been done since the last time we were there. Okay.
Do I have a second?
Okay.
Okay. It's, Leslie Tarkington, seconded by Jeff Raymer. Any objections to accepting the report? Thank you. That report is accepted, 12-0.
Thank you.
Next item. Item number 5 is the Controller's report. Our Controller, Peter Minarski.
Good evening, everyone. Controller's report, I'll start out with the American Rescue Plan, ARP. The second tranche from the federal government for $9 million, $9.596 million came the first weekend of July. We got it July 5th. The second tranche for the state pass-through for 6/1 has yet to be received. I actually contacted the town of Fairfield, who I'm coordinating with on ARP and other matters. They haven't received it either. So it's the state of Connecticut. All the municipalities haven't received it. So we're still looking for that second tranche. And then what I'll do is going forward, I'll give a monthly update on the spending. As of June 30th, there's only 2 active programs. There's the GHS soil remediation from last year, and I put the figures in. The $6.8 million has been expended. 2.9 has been encumbered, and the balance is $201,000. That will be reported to the U.S. Treasury as of June 30th. The only under active, when I say active, I'm not talking about planning or permitting or anything. Actually, we spent money, which I report to the Treasury, was $1,415 for Harding Road drainage project. I file quarterly with the U.S. Treasury, so we'll probably have a lot more expenditures and activity when I report for the next quarter that ends September 30th and reports by October 31st. 1 or 2 more quick comments, and I'll come back for questions. We're opening the audit. The auditors came out in May to do some preliminary work, and they usually test the tax collector office in May, and they retreat and come back in September and do the bulk of their field work in September. The plan, as it is every year, is to get an annual comprehensive financial report for October. They've promised us this year that the single audits will not be late. The guidance that they receive from the government, they've already received, which is good news. And what I put in here in the second paragraph or second topic is, as you all know, we extended the bans for 13 months. One of the hardest parts about the month of December is closing out the annual audit, writing the official statement, putting the credit reviews together. And the official statement and the credit reviews are dependent upon a final audit, not a pro forma, but a final audit. And it's somewhat stressful for the financial advisor, Bill Lindsay, and I. We have to manage to get that out very quickly, and it interferes with the credit rating, credit reviews. So by moving it to the 13th month, all of that is a relief that we'll be doing the credit reviews and the official statement much later in December into January, which is good news. One more comment, it really is a question that came from Ms. Moriarty, and it's an update in the risk management section for the North Mianus water damage that occurred in February of 2021. I checked with the risk manager. The total claim was $1,192,187. There's $100,000 deductible, and we received the balance in two pieces, or actually it was four pieces, and they're only holding back $14,000. So we'll be getting the total claim of $1,192,000 minus $100,000. So I will open that up for any questions in the controller's report.
Any questions? Okay. That was a very thorough report. No
Okay.
questions. Can I get a motion to accept?
So I move to accept the controller's report.
I'll second.
Okay. Any objections? Okay, the controls report is accepted by a vote of 12-0. Thank you. Item 6 is our treasurer's report.
A couple of quick comments on the Treasurer's report. On the front page, the general fund balance, $130 million. Keep in mind that $53 million of that was prepayments that came in June. And they don't actually flip over and are credited as revenue until July 1st. And it's the balance minus the 53 is in line with prior years. You can, what you can do, if you want a history of the year-ending balance, you can look at Natasha Yemet's cash flow report that she sends to the IAC every year, and you can see it's pretty consistent with the cash balances. Opeb, like the retirement board, did not do well. They lost a few $1 million. On the second page, they lost $4.8 million appreciation over the year. As I stated at the bottom of the report, the ARP, the $15,747,000, which is basically invested in 3 T-bills, does not reflect the $9.5 million and the $6.1 we're going to receive in July. Any questions on the Treasurer's report?
I move that we accept the treasurer's report.
I'll
Okay.
second.
Okay, moved by Leslie Tarkington, seconded by Leslie Moriarty. Any objections to accepting the treasurer's report? Hearing none, that passes 12-0. Thank you. Okay, next item is item 10, old business, BET professional fees, fiscal year '22, a vote to use encumbered funds. There are 2 items here. The first one is the Nathaniel Witherall study.
So, you want a motion? So I move that we approve proceeding with the Nathaniel Witherall study at a cost or of amount available from the consulting funds of $75,000.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Okay. I would refer everyone to the page right after, well, right after the treasurer's report. Okay, this is in the packet that was posted, and what you will see is a 1-page summary of this item. just to give you everybody a little bit of background. The initiative of, reviewing various options for the Nathaniel Witherall has been ongoing for, many years. And last year, we got a response on a request for proposal, 7568, which was reviewing various proposals of entities that would take over the management of the Nathaniel Witherall with a long-term lease. There was a committee that provided a recommendation to the first selectman. That recommendation was shared with the Nathaniel Witherall board. Subsequent to that, this was a confidential RFP committee. Subsequent to that, the information from the RFP was posted on the first selectman's website. So if anyone wants further background, certainly the information is available there. The purpose of this, use of the funds of $75,000 is there is a view that there is a potential transaction that could make sense for the Nathaniel Witherall, but to determine if it could make sense or would make sense, there's additional due diligence that would be needed, and there is additional input on the structuring of the transaction. To that purpose, the first selectman, Fred Camillo, Town Administrator Ben Brannion, and Larry Simon, the chairman of the Nathaniel Witherall Board, requested funds to hire an advisor to do the due diligence and review the deal terms. With that, the view was to create a committee of 5 people that would work with the potential advisor to kind of design a program so that we would get the information needed to have a real transaction that various town bodies could review. It's important to note that there's 2 things these funds are not intended to do. They're not intended to study the Nathaniel Witherall and determine, its status or, various options on the future Nathaniel Witherall. It is also not intended to recommend that a transaction is approved by the town bodies. The purpose of these funds is to do a due diligence on the possible providers and review the terms of a transaction so that there would be an actionable transaction in front of the town bodies, and those town bodies would then decide whether or not to proceed. The town bodies that would have to ultimately approve and review a transaction like this would be the Board of Selectmen, the Nathaniel Witherall Board, the RTM, the P&Z, and the heirs as well. So that is the background. Since this discussion, I did have some conversations with Peter Minarski and Ben Brannion, and we do believe that adding Peter Minarski to the list of those reviewing the advisor would be appropriate, because these funds would be coming out of the finance department's consulting monies. So that's the quick summary. I now open it up to questions or comments. Laura Erickson.
Thank you, Dan. I just wanted, just for clarity, just to go through some of the language on this. We had asked for proposals to be in writing, and I appreciate that it's in writing, but just for clarity, I just want to get some of the terms. I want to be sure we're all on the same understanding. So in the 3rd paragraph, where it says the working group consisted of, I want to clarify that this proposed working group is not the same as the evaluation committee, so I would suggest we just make it the proposed working group consists of, and then add Peter Minarski to the list underneath. I think that's a good suggestion.
Okay.
Under the list of names, where it says if an advisor or consultant is retained, I want and we don't need to change it, but I want people to understand that it could be plural. We may also wish to engage legal counsel on specific points, so I want to be certain that people understand that it could be more than one. And then finally, in the 3rd to the last paragraph, it says the working group would review the proposals and select the vendor. I want to be just crystal clear that we're not talking about the vendor referred to in the second paragraph, we're talking about the advisor consultants.
Yes,
So
agreed.
just with
Those are all, yep.
to make it a little crisper, and so we're all on the common understanding. And finally, just for clarity, my understanding is due to timing that these funds have been encumbered, and I am supportive of doing this work with the fiscal 22. Is that correct, Pete?
These are 21, 22 funds last year.
Right.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Jeff?
Just then slightly along the same lines. In the third from the last paragraph, the word vendors comes up twice. And in each of those two different sentences, in line with Laura's comments, I think it should say advisors slash consultants in place of both of those two vendors. If I can pick on another word in that paragraph, that second sentence reads, the working group will review the proposals and not select, but recommend the vendors that would best serve the interests of the town. If I may, in the second to the last paragraph, Laura has already pointed out, it's not funds which will be encumbered, but have been encumbered, or have they not been encumbered yet, Pete?
No, they are encumbered.
So perhaps the
Have.
syntax of the sentence should be have been encumbered rather than will be. Then I had one more in the second paragraph, up near the top if I can. After extensive review by an evaluation committee for the RFP, the committee recommended that the first selectman evaluate, there was not a recommendation to my understanding, and negotiate a long-term agreement. Is my understanding that they were involved in evaluation, and I think perhaps we should delete the words "and negotiate."
So, thank you, Jeff. On that, since I was not on the committee, could I ask either Bill or Laura to comment on that? Because it was you were both on it.
Sure, and Laura can add. First of all, I'm fully in favor of Laura's modifications. They're all very good. Jeff's too. I think this is one of those judgment calls. The basic terms have been set. They don't need to be negotiated. But like anything, by the time it gets reduced to legal agreements, that does take negotiation. So how do you want to call it? The terms are agreed in writing on a term sheet kind of thing, the terms of the lease. But by the time you reduce it to signable, executable contracts, that always takes back and forth with lawyers, I think, Jeff?
I'm a little uncomfortable with the evaluation committee having legal standing to negotiate an agreement, meaning to reach legal finality. I would have thought that the jurisdiction for that rests in the board of Nathaniel Witherell. I think the evaluation committee, a very capable people, by the way, I thank them for their time and effort. They did a lot of good work. But this was a committee of the first selectman to have the industry and creativity to come up with some possibilities. I don't think that's a committee that has standing to negotiate a long-term agreement with a selected vendor.
So I think, just, I'm sorry, Karen.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not reading it that way, Jeff. I'm reading it that the committee recommended that the first selectman, it's the first selectman evaluate and negotiate. It's not the committee that's doing that.
Well, the first selectman also, forgive me, a man of great capacity legally and great capability personally, he's not the right person, the correct person legally to negotiate a long-term agreement with a selected vendor either. That agreement has to come from the board of the Nathaniel Witherell.
No, that wasn't the advice. The legal advice was that if it's a lease, the board must approve it. That's not the same as having the board negotiating power. They don't.
Laura, do you have anything to add to the discussion about, basically in the second paragraph, it says evaluate and negotiate. I think, Jeff, you're proposing to just say evaluate, take out and negotiate.
I would take out the words "and negotiate."
I think, Bill,
I don't think we need to debate the negotiation issue. I only want to delete the words so that we're skirting that issue.
I understand. But I would also say that, Laura and Bill were on the committee, so I want to get their input.
I agree.
Laura, what's your?
Maybe the word negotiate and complete?
I mean, in essence, it was a special committee formed at the behest of the first selectman, and our recommendation was made to the first selectman. The co-chairs of the evaluation committee presented to the Nathaniel Witherell Board in executive session. As Jeff points out, that body does have governance over the facility, but it is a multi-step approval process. So I don't know if we want to split hairs. I mean, the evaluation committee made a recommendation to the first selectman. It's posted, anyone can see it. If you don't like the word negotiate, you could say evaluate and pursue.
Sure.
But I don't know if we need to get into a bunch of wordsmithing here.
Sure.
Evaluate
Laura's
and
idea is
pursue.
good.
Excellent suggestion, Laura.
And one thing I would also say is that perhaps we can maybe add a link here. I know there is a link at the bottom, but we should just make sure there is a link so that anyone who wants to read it can actually read the words that came from your committee, because they are in writing.
And I would be happy if someone would send me a Word version of this to make the markups and send it to Mr. Winarski for the minutes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Nothing else, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I just want to, I have no more changes to the document itself, but I did want to emphasize that this really is a multifaceted research project, right? There's not just continuing the specific responses from the RFP on the selected vendor and what they provide, but it's also in the second item here, when it's an opinion on the terms of agreement are fair to the town. That's broader than just is this particular vendor giving us the best deal we can for that particular transaction. It's really, is this the right option for the town? What are we giving? What are the pros and cons of the transaction? And I think that's a fair assessment. There's certainly a lot of data and information which hasn't yet really been collected on what liabilities stay with the town, what's the cash flow implications, and those are things that still are part of this next stage. Whether this working group can get into that level of detail, I think that's the direction it needs to go. And then there are legal aspects, again, with what limitations we have in terms of what options for the site and the facility based on the structure that we have from the donation. So that's why I think the change to potentially multiple advisors or consultants is an important one, because there are really multiple aspects of this next stage of work.
Thank you.
I'm happy to move the item if
Yep.
we're ready. I move the
Yes.
item.
You have a second?
Second.
As it, this is, you,
I think it was me and you.
yeah,
We already moved.
yeah, moved, okay. But we are making amendments, so Laura, you're moving your amendments, Bill's seconding them? Yes. Okay, can we have I think we discussed the amendments. Can we have a vote on the amendments? Any objections? Okay, amendments are approved 12-0.
Who made the
Laura
the
Erickson.
second? I didn't get the second.
Bill.
Oh,
Bill
Bill?
Gray, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, and can we, any discussion on the motion as amended? Okay, any objections? Okay, 12-0. Thank you. Okay. The next item is also part of old business, and this is an item to approve $15,000 to engage a construction estimator. Can I get a motion?
So I'll move that we encumber funds to engage a construction estimator, and the fund should be $15,000.
Here, second?
I can second.
Nisha Rohr, Leslie Tarkington, Nisha Rohr, second. Okay. So this item is on the agenda. There weren't any papers included in the package from Friday, but some additional information was shared with the BET. The idea behind this is that we all know that there's some significant school projects coming up, Central Middle School, which will definitely be the biggest project in Greenwich history. And we also understand that this is a project that is under a very, very tight timeframe. There was no feasibility study in this, and right now it is in front of the Board of Ed, who is attempting to improve ed specs, and a building committee has been created that will then take those ed specs and, put together a building plan and get firm bids and do the detail with the architects. I would note that, this process is starting in July, really, and the idea would be that we would hope to be able to appropriate monies in the fiscal '24 budget, and, all of that's coming up quite quickly. In the process over the last few months, we did talk about the idea of having a cost estimator that the BET would have access to, and these funds would, 15,000, again, this would be from fiscal '22. They have been encumbered, but obviously we would need to approve them tonight. Although they're encumbered, we still need to approve them if we wish to do this. That's pretty much my summary, and I'll open it up to discussion. Jeff?
A few things. First of all, it's a concern to me that the materials come out to us at 3:59 this afternoon, which means in just an hour or two before the meeting commences. But there are a few things that I think are worthy of some attention. So, for example, we have a charter and code, and it governs us. Sometimes that's an inconvenience, but process is important. Chapter 2 of our charter and code, titled Administration, Article 9, Sections 239 through 2-46.1 governs school committees. Section 239 reads as follows. Notwithstanding any provision of any special act to the contrary, the construction of each new school building and appurtenant facilities, and each addition to and alteration of any existing school building and appurtenant facilities shall, when the project involves an application for state or federal aid or one or more municipal improvements, shall be under the supervision of a school building committee appointed for each separate and specific project. Separately, it's section 2-42, where it talks about the powers of the committee. It talks about the procedure. Section B says, upon receipt from the Board of Education of its certificate of necessity, its educational specifications and requirements for the project, and its request for the appointment of a committee, the selectmen shall forthwith, and then it lists the steps to be taken. We've already telescoped that, and I think we telescoped that, for reasonably good reason. This was work that we were doing in March to try and accelerate the process of building the schools. We encouraged and invited the first selectman to nominate a committee without waiting for the Board of Education approval of the ed specifications. Nevertheless, the expectation of our charter is that the Board of Education prepares the ed specs, and control of the project is vested in a school committee. It's not clear to me where these funds were intended to go. I don't want to have two separate bodies doing the feasibility work and developing the basic parameters of the project, so we end up with dueling ed specs or dueling estimates. The control of the project is intended to be entrusted to the building committee, not to the BET, not to the first selectman, not to a board of selectmen, not to anybody else. It seems to me then that the decision of hiring an estimator and who that estimator should be ought to be the business of the building committee. If hired, it should be hired by the building committee, and the estimator should be reporting to the building committee. At the dollar figures we're talking about, I think it falls below the threshold where an RFP and competitive bidding is required. But nevertheless, I think an RFP and competitive bidding is recommendable, even if this item comes in at under $15,000. Maybe the sum could be paid out of the $2.5 million that we already appropriated for the current fiscal year capital budget. I'm not adverse to the figure. The figure is small. But candidly, it seems to me that until the ed specs are done, we don't even really have a square footage of the building or the basic parameters of what it consists of. I don't really want to have an independent estimator doing an estimate with their own view of what the square footage should be and their own view of what the elements ought to be without the benefit of what the school board passes as being its ed specs. Even when we get to the point of having the ed specs, I don't want to have two sets of parameters of what they think the construction ought to look like. That's the business of the building committee. So my feeling about this is that this is an item, especially given the short notice to us, that this is an item that we ought to refer to the building committee. If you want to be reflecting to the building committee that we would like to allocate up to $15,000 to subsidize their effort, that makes sense to me. I don't mind that. I think that's harmless. Again, the dollar figure isn't great. It's the mechanics of it that I'm uncomfortable with, of having two bodies dealing with something. I'm not clear exactly who these funds would be released to. I'm proposing to you that we refer this to the building committee and that this be treated going forward as being a release of funds to the building committee to take under their advisement. Is it appropriate to have an independent estimator? If so, they should go through the process of hiring one. We recommend that it be by a competitive bidding process, and we're happy to up to the $15,000 to reimburse the cost of pursuing that. But I think this is their project, in their judgment. They should be picking somebody responsive to them because they need to do this project properly.
Thank you, Jeff. Nisha?
Yeah, I just wanted to give some color as to the thought process of how this project came about. And, we've been talking about it for a few months. Really, the role of this estimator is to assist our board, the financial board, which is really responsible for the budgeting and the financial success to make sure that we can get this project done within budget. But really, thinking through, just watching this board in discussions of capital projects, not only school capital projects, but other capital projects, really thinking through what type of questions we should be asking, what type of, especially around budgeting. But I think it will really equip the BET to help us estimate the cost of the build, help us think through the various options that are going to be presented to us by the building committee, and really help us also do some benchmarking to other similar projects, similar in size, scope, and geography. I think this is information we typically just don't have on this board. I don't think any of us are immersed in that industry. As you know, I am also the BET representative on the building committee, so I'm not completely averse to Jeff, to your idea, but really stepping back from that, whether it's me on the committee or anybody else, I just think this particular individual or firm is just a good process to have on capital projects for our board, independent of anyone else. The role of the Board of Ed really is done after the ed specs are done. It's handed over to the building committee, but the role of the financial budgeting of this project really rests within our group. So for example, even now, when the Board of Ed is having discussions on, what size this building should be, whether it's 100,000 square feet or 120,000 square feet, I think it would be really important for our board to think through, or even have a sense of, the budget could be 50% more, or 10% more, or 20% more, whatever that might be, because we still live in a world of constraints, budget constraints, and we do have a budget. So I think it's important to opine on all of those, even as the process goes on. And, obviously for this project, it's going to be after the ed specs are completed. But throughout this project, as we're presented with options, various options that the committee is going to present, should we do A or B, I think it would be a nice to have for our board to equip us to ask appropriate budget questions and somebody that works for our board. Again, I think if it gets handed off to the building committee, I'm also on the building committee, so I think that would be fine, but I think it'd be nice for our board, 12 members, to be able to ask really appropriate questions and think through the budget of various options that are going to be presented to us.
Any other discussion? Leslie?
So for several of the reasons that Ms. Aurora just identified, it gives me even more concern about moving down this path. So we're talking about engaging an estimator at the very beginning of the building committee's process, where many assumptions would have to be made, both on not on the size of the building or the number of rooms, because that'll be in the ed specs, but certainly how they're outfitted. We don't know much about the site conditions. We don't know much about the exterior needs for the playing fields and the other aspects of the project. We don't know, we all, have suffered through before the impact of P&Z decisions on parking and hardscape and landscaping, which are not often anticipated at the initial budgeting of the process. So I feel like we engage an estimator who will do as good a job as they can do, taking the information available, but there's so many gaps in that information, so we'll be asking financial questions and setting financial limits to that building committee based on estimates of estimates of estimates. And I think at the end of the day, it doesn't work to help the conversations or the decision-making process and what building they need to have and versus what we can afford. We know what we can afford, which is we'll want to go as little as possible. But that's not the conversation and the way that the building should be designed. So I am concerned that this is going to set us on the wrong path and somewhat adversarial conversations with the Board of Ed, who is the one promoting or identifying what the dollar is in their budget. The identification, the fact that this concept was talked about for a couple of board meetings, a couple of months, we've been asking for documentation. What does this really mean? Even what's provided now, it doesn't tell me when we establish the estimator. Assume it's after the ed specs, but it's probably maybe before the building committee even starts to clarify some of the unknowns. And it's not a lot of money, but I'd rather spend this money on things for the building than for information that is just going to cause us, I think, not give us good information at this point. Whether at some point down the road, it makes sense to do a double check on the numbers coming from the architect and the estimators that the Board of Ed is hiring, or the building committee's hiring, because they absolutely do that during their processes. That's different if we're not sure we're getting good information. But at this point, I think this does not really help the BET do its job.
Thank you. Steve, just before
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Leslie Moriarty said. I don't necessarily think that it's a mistake for us to have a cost estimator, but I do think that this is wildly premature. And if we're going to do this, I want to make sure that we get value for our money. And I just think at this time, there are way too many unknowns about the scope of this project. I mean, there are loose ed specs for us to really get the benefits that Ms. Rohr has suggested. And so I'm not saying that I'm opposed to this, but I'm certainly opposed to it now.
Thank you. Peter, can I just get a clarification? One of the reasons we're doing this now is we have encumbered fiscal 22 funds. And look, I do agree with some of the comments that just because we have the money doesn't mean that, next week we start asking for estimates. That's clearly premature because we don't even have ed specs yet. So my question is, if you encumber these funds and we vote to approve today, is there a time limit as to when we need to start spending those funds?
No, you've got the whole fiscal year. I wouldn't expect, let's say you just approved it, I wouldn't expect you to hire anybody in the next 1, 2, or 3 months, because some of the reasons is there's too many unknowns. You have two options here. You can vote up or down. If you vote down, and you change your mind 6 months from now, you've got a new appropriation for $150,000 in the current year. So you can revisit this in the current year with the new appropriation for $150,000. But the simple answer is you don't have to do anything in the next few weeks or few months.
Correct, but if we did want to use the fiscal 22 funds, we would have to vote yes today.
Correct.
Can I ask another follow-up with the controller just on that? If we wanted to provide or transfer this $15,000 to the building committee, do we still have the ability to do that in fiscal '22?
What do you think about that one?
I mean, I guess if the building committee.
Oh, it's an increased appropriation for them, isn't it?
It's not their appropriation, but I
Yeah.
guess if we wanted to get the estimate and say we'll pay for it for your committee.
You can do it. There's two comments. Number one, we've got a small amount of money. They have 50, 60, 70 million dollars. There's a precedence. When the cybersecurity broke, we shared with the former Bloom Shapiro a study with the Board of Education for cybersecurity. We also shared with the Bloom on the capital projects study. So there are precedences where, to answer your question, you could share, but it's $60 million versus 15,000. I don't think they need the money.
Leslie Tarkington, and then Laura Erickson, and then Bill Drake.
So I support doing this sooner rather than later. And, I think you mentioned, Dan, that this is the largest project that we will, have ever undertaken in the town as a capital project. And when I look at that, and then also, as far as I know, for any major capital project like a school or, redoing Nathaniel Witherall or the new fire station, public safety building, et cetera, we always did feasibility first. And there was usually, to the best of my knowledge, a cost estimation done at that point in time. In this case, to expedite this project, which we all support, we said, okay, we are going to skip the feasibility stage. So from my standpoint, this minor, expense of up to $15,000 gives us the opportunity and, to look at the different aspects of this. And I think the little paragraph, which I guess was unfortunately only limited distribution, I guess earlier than this afternoon, gives us an opportunity to at least consider some of these things. I think it can be, it shouldn't, necessarily be one person. We can have, the chair can name a couple of people or 3 or 4 that can be involved or, change this. But to me, the more information that all of us, the BOE, the building committee, et cetera, get done sooner and have an overview, the better. And quite frankly, while I say soon, I think it would be most productive after the ed specs are approved by the BOE and be all set to go like fast. So you're not slowing up the building committee, but provides an additional platform of information. And so I would recommend that we continue with this and, we could save money. We could learn a lot from it. I mean, quite honestly, I put in things like, can we still use Central Middle School while this very, very major now, well over 100,000 square feet project is under construction, et cetera. So I think we could learn some things by having a third party come in and look objectively. I support proceeding, but again, support proceeding after ed specs are approved by the Board of Education.
Thank you, Laura. Then Bill, and then Miriam.
So I just want to step back for a second and acknowledge the merit of the idea that's behind this concept, which is, back in February when we started talking about this, we had close to $90 million in capital projects that we were vetting. And some of us were frustrated by some of the information that we felt we needed more and better information to make good decisions. So I acknowledge the merit behind this. But in the interim, we now have a path forward, which we've all agreed that the feasibility study, we're not going to go through that normal process. We're going to fast track it. And normally, the building committee has that feasibility document with preliminary site plans, preliminary budgets, so we're sort of, starting to step back. I do think that now that the building committee has been formed, we have our BET and BOE representatives, and by all accounts, we have some new faces to this building committee with a remarkable breadth in the construction business. I would like their input. I mean, I think that referring it to the building committee, I don't mind encumbering the funds now with fiscal '22, but I'd like the benefit of their discussion and what they think they would do with it, because it doesn't make any sense to have two different bodies do estimators. And at the end of the day, I think we all have to recognize they're just estimates. They should have a higher contingency built into them because of all the unknowns. And what's going to dictate the project is the bids. And we probably won't have those bids till late spring of fiscal '23. So I think if the purpose is to get a better number for our capital budget this fall that we'll be reviewing extensively, I don't mind it, but I would much rather have, now that the building committee's been formed, the benefit of their expertise. I think, to have the BET say, this is what we're doing, when that building committee has only met once, to my knowledge, I'm not even sure if you've got your schedule of meetings arranged yet or when your next meeting is. I want to be respectful to the building committee. So I like Jeff's suggestion of referring it to the building committee. Don't mind the number, don't mind encumbering the funds, but let's take a beat before we proceed. Thank you.
We have Bill Drake, Miriam, and then David.
I think Laura makes many points of very good sense. But, a minute ago, we just approved unanimously $75,000 of outside advice on a topic, just to inform us about the withdrawal. Here we have a much smaller amount on a much larger project. There's nothing wrong with this board having an independent view of these matters. This is definitely value for money. The cost is modest, the expense, the capital is going to be gigantic. And we're not revising the ed spec and not straying into the zone of activities of the building committee. We're the finance board asking for advice about an appropriation. That's fully appropriate that we gather for ourselves some advice about an appropriation. That's our business. To me, this is kind of like your doctor makes a recommendation. Do you get a second opinion? Well, not on every recommendation of my doctor, but the important ones I do. You do too. So here's your opportunity to, for a modest amount, get a second look. We can't say, we've heard today from the board that it's doomed to fail. It's neither doomed to fail nor doomed to succeed. We can't say today that this thing is going to be ineffective, nor that it'll be effective. Let's have a look at it, and we can weigh it. If it is inappropriate or wrong, we'll all set it aside. If it's valid, we'll learn something from it. But this is a case of gathering a little information that could be useful to inform our board about an appropriation, a giant one that's coming our way. Nothing wrong with getting a little information.
I think it's Miriam, and then David, and then it's going to be Harry. Miriam.
Thank you.
I'm going to just put you near the mic. Okay.
Okay. All right. So thanks. So I have a question, and I either to the chair or through the chair to whomever can answer. Obviously, since this would be a new process for us, transparency of process, I think would be very important to give it credibility. Is the intent to, because it's a small amount, to go with the one provider that was shared with us kind of offline, or would this go through a formal bid process? Is the intention to go through a formal bid process?
Look, here's what I would say. First, on transparency, certainly all our actions that we take on this would go through our controller, Peter Minosky, because these are funds within his consulting budget. From a transparency point of view, I'm also comfortable with the idea of, having one person from each aisle kind of shadow this, because it may be weeks before we say, oh, we're going to pull the trigger and, hire somebody, or we can hire somebody on kind of a contingent basis, saying, look, we've agreed something with you, but you're not doing any work until you're ready. I would also just add, just because I'm speaking, that I think for $15,000, I don't particularly like the idea of moving this money over to the building committee. I am very comfortable saying that, when we discuss what we're going to do, that we would consult with the building committee, that, before we do pull a trigger on do this piece of the project, that we have a conversation with them and we let them know that that's what we're going to do. Because certainly from a financial planning point of view, as you know, we're not going to get the bids until the spring, but we'll be basically having to approve an appropriation almost simultaneously, right? So having some planning thought ahead of time is something that, I do think can be helpful to make sure this project gets done. So that to your last question, would we go ahead with this provider? I know that Nisha in the spring had done some research on this, and I think it had some discussion. I think there was an estimate provided that I think Roland shared. There's nothing that I've seen about this provider for this amount of money that I would think an RFP would be required, certainly. But I think as a board, if people want to spend the time and engage on the question, have other ideas of other providers, I'm not certainly in my mind 100% committed to this one, but from what I've looked at, they could do the job. So I don't know if that answers your question, Miriam.
It does. I guess I'll just state it publicly. I would feel much more comfortable if it was a competitive process. A lot of the examples that I saw, at least from this particular provider, for example, there was I don't believe anything in there that would require or the history with a municipality. And as you know, dealing with governments is very different than dealing with private institutions. So, I do think an RFP process at a minimum would be called for us to feel comfortable that, we've got the right partner in this, that, would be a new endeavor for us, an important one, but a new one.
Okay, so I know Nisha wanted, I know that some others want to speak, I think everybody. But just to you, Peter, do you have any thought or reaction to this conversation about RFP or not, or the providers, et cetera?
An RFP is not required if it's under $15,000. It would be advisable to get more than one quote, preferably 3 quotes. That satisfies the purchasing requirement. I sent you all out the email that was generated from Renata, the purchasing agent, in February. To avoid, it doesn't have to go to the legal department if they use the town's contract. So to satisfy Miriam's concern, you don't need to do an RFP. It's under $15,000, and you meet the best practices of getting at least 2 or 3 quotes.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
just trying to keep, it was,
Nisha wanted to say, and then I'll go.
okay.
I just wanted to give a quick 2 cents on the background of the firms that was provided. So back in the spring, when this project initially came to us and we were voting to approve really the $70 million or $67.5 million for this project, I was just trying to get a handle of what projects like this should cost. So in that process, I reached out to some Central Minnesota parents, and one of the parents referred me to this firm. I have no background in school construction. I have no background with this firm. I don't know this individual, but I did interview them on behalf of our board to see if this is something that they would consider doing and what something like this could potentially cost. And that was the number they came up with. It was an email exchange, and they do have a background in municipal and specifically school projects. So that's where that number came from, but I did want to provide that background.
Okay, thank you. I think we have David, and then it's going to be Harry, and then Karen.
Jeff, maybe?
Oh, yes.
At the end, thank you.
So this is an interesting conversation. In the real estate business, you go out and get an appraisal on property, and there's, these appraisers are, their credential is MAI, right? And that's a certified real estate appraisal. But in the industry, it's known as made as instructed, And the problem I have with how we're going about this is that if we, the BET, engage with a sole entity to do, let's face it, what will be a very sensitive estimate of cost, it will be perceived, or it could be perceived, as politically tainted and made as instructed. We're hiring them, we're paying them, they're giving us a number that's, to fit whatever objective we have. And Dan, I think, acknowledges that when he says, well, we'd have one Republican shadow them and one Democrat shadow them. It only underscores what would be perceived as something political. So I think the notion of, getting a better sense of the costs has merit, but I think that we would all be on better ground if it was done through the building committee, which is, one step removed from all this, and will be obviously engaged in the project as they go forward. And then feedback can be given, and should be given, by the BET as to, whatever we may think, as to whatever the cost estimator engaged by the independent building committee comes up with. The other issue here is, so the question is, who's the client? Is it going to be the BET, which is frankly a political group, or the building committee, which is less so and is not? Second issue is the whole issue of disclosure. It does trouble me that we saw this just a few minutes ago, and that the Board of Ed and the building committee are completely unaware of this. And so right away, if we take a vote on this today, they've been out of the picture, they're not involved, and then it's just a BET exercise 100%. I don't think that's advisable. Number three, what do we want this entity to do? It's not really, there's been no delineation of the specifications that we're charging this advisor to do. They are involved in the material that I was glancing at, planning. They are providing, they do strategic and tactical planning, they do design work, they do construction work, they do closeout, they do a range of things. So not quite clear what exactly, and to the point that Leslie Tarkington was saying, they could give us advice, she said, as to whether Central Middle School can still be used while under construction. And so it's a very broad remit that I think some of us are considering. And so I think, cutting to the heart of it, that fine to have an estimate, it would have value. I really think that we should allocate the money to the building committee, let them choose the entity, and draw up the specs as to what the, what the estimator would do. Thank you.
Okay. I believe it's going to be Harry, but I just do want to respond to one thing specifically. I know there was an email that went out earlier saying that the Board of Ed was not aware of this in any way. From that point of view, that's really not completely accurate. The Board of Ed has not been asked to vote on this, but in the last 2 weeks at the Board of Ed Budget Committee, I raised this issue. We discussed it. Dan Watson was there, the superintendent was there. Subsequent to that, so during that discussion, they didn't vote on it, they didn't approve it, they didn't say they would approve it, they weren't asked to approve it, but there was no pushback from the Budget Committee members except for one, and certainly none from the administration. Subsequent to that, I did speak to Kathleen Stowe, who is the Board of Ed chair, and I just asked her, look, this is something we're looking into. If you have concerns, let me know. I didn't ask her to approve it. She didn't, we didn't have a subsequent conversation. But I said, look, this is something that you really have an issue with. Please let me know. So I just want to clarify that. And Harry, and then it's going to be Karen, and then Jeff.
Yeah, I just want to state that it makes no sense in my mind to give this money to the building committee. Number one, it would be sort of telling them what to do. Number two, this is crafted as being independent information for the BET to help it craft, an independent view of what the school should cost. And I think it's really simple. I think this thing's being overly encumbered by speculation as to what the funds and when the funds and all that. This is really just encumbering $15,000 out of the fiscal '22 budget for our purposes and our independent view. And I think it'd be very helpful, and I intend to support it.
Karen?
Yeah, I understand what my Republican colleagues are requesting, but I'm also listening to what my Democratic colleagues are on this board are saying and understand your concerns. I just want to state from the outset, I don't support giving the money to the building committee, so that for me is a non-starter. My only other comment is that if we do go down this road, and I firmly believe that more information is better, I have been advocating and do believe that we should articulate a process going forward. It would be the who, what, where, when, and how type of process. We should articulate how we would go about identifying a vendor, when we would engage one, at what point, what is the scope and specifics, and then how do we deal with the information that is provided. Again, I think that the idea of a construction estimator is a good one, but I do think that we need a BET process if we are going to be using one now and in the future, so that everybody is clear with the expectations going forward, and we understand what is going to be used, what this information is going to be used for.
Thank you. And Jeff?
So two things, if I can. First, regarding Lear Cumming, I just wanted to comment there that as you go through the materials that they presented, and this does not pretend to be a full statement of their full portfolio of work, but I don't see a single project in which they've done a public school. I see private schools. I don't see a single project in the state of Connecticut. I don't see that they've in any way worked with the vagaries of the state reimbursement process and the requirements that are involved in that, and that certainly is a consideration. When you go onto the website, they identify 5 principals, one in Miami, one in New Jersey, and the other 3 at their office on 3rd Avenue in New York City. I mention that because at the foot of this presentation, they give an address of 16 Wilton Road in Westport. I don't know what that address is, but it's not an address that's shown in their website. I think there is a certain caution, at least to be a little more careful to go beyond what we've seen so far on the question of the who. On the underlying question, there's a timing question that I think gets to the core of what my concern is. If an estimator is hired at a fairly soon place, if he's going to adopt chapter and verse the ed specs as put forward by the town and has essentially the same dollar figures, I think the expenditure has produced nothing for us. If he produces something in which he varies from the ed specs, which is not the invitation that Dan's memorandum has asked for. Dan's memorandum asked for it for the consultant to follow, I think was the expression, the ed specs. But assuming if he comes up with something that's different, now I have 2 bodies out there with dueling ed specs. I don't think that's healthy. If he agrees with the ed specs but has a materially different dollar figure, I have a similar situation in which I have us badgering at an early stage the building committee to try and conform the figures not to the figures being proposed by the ed specs, but the figures that are being proposed by our independent consultant. And I don't think it's the intent or business of the BET to be badgering the building committee to try and shift, find things to cut, find things to reduce, to try and move to something that is lower and different from what they would have recommended within their mind, what's in the best interests of the town as a whole. We have a long time in which we can wait with this proposal. It doesn't need to be dealt with now. We've already approved $2.5 million worth of funding for the A&E on this. To my best recollection, and maybe I'm mistaken about this, but I don't think those funds are conditioned. it means that they're going to move forward and do the architectural engineering work on this and put things out for bid. If, as we're moving along, after we've seen their ed specs, after we've seen their estimates, after we've seen the early stages of the process while the building committee is working with its architectural engineering and the early stages of that, if we're becoming increasingly uncomfortable, there's plenty of time then for us to step out. The next time on which we're actually voting on something is going to be on construction loan financing. No, not loan, I don't mean to say loan, on construction financing with the bids in front of us. But if there's something that makes us feel like this trolley is going off the rails, there's plenty of time for us to go out and get bids from or estimates, whatever is the path we're following, on 3 or 4 people in this trade, not just Lear or Cummings. But for us to do it now feels like what we're inviting here, what we're actually seeking here, is to have either dueling ed specs, or if not dueling ed specs, at least dueling dollar figures. And I just don't think that's healthy. We've left our lane. We're doing more than what we're supposed to be doing. We, at this point, have approved the funding for the A&E. This is the moment now in which we allow that building committee to move forward with its work, and we sit with watchful quiet and watch what's going on and not be interfering with their process.
Thank you. I think we have
Mr.
Karen and then Leslie. I'm sorry, Laura then wanted to say something. Thank you.
Who do you want first? Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm going to make a motion that we encumber the money now and have discussions on the particulars at our September meeting. Nothing is going to be done in the interim anyway. And I do believe that, in the interest of bipartisanship, that we should just knock our heads together and come up with an acceptable either procedure or not. If we don't, then we can let it lapse and go on our merry way. Or we can take a vote along party lines.
I'd second your motion.
Okay, well.
Oh, sorry, David.
David
I beat you
was
to
gonna
it. No, David can second it. Okay.
So that's my motion.
Laura? So motion by Fasciotis, second by Weisbrot.
I actually think that's a very constructive motion. I don't want to overcomplicate, what the discussion is today is whether or not we're going to keep the encumbrance of $15,000 for the fiscal '22 funds. I'm comfortable doing so. I am uncomfortable proceeding with the next step before this is fully vetted by the building committee and perhaps the Board of Ed. I do want to dial back some of my colleagues' comments about dueling ed specs. I just want to be very clear. The ed specs are the purview of the Board of Education, not the building committee, not the BET, not cost estimators. They're purely in the purview of the Board of Ed. And I know we all know that, but I think it just bears repeating because I don't want, we are starting a very months-long, years-long journey here. And I want to get off on the right foot. I want to be, no pun intended, constructive, and I think Karen's pathway forward is a good way to go, so I would support that.
Fantastic. So I completely agree on one condition that we don't, no, I'm just joking, that we don't have the exact same conversation in September. We talk about a solution then, but thanks everybody. I would like to, yes, oh Miriam, sorry.
This. I love Karen's idea and I'll be fully supportive of it. But I do think either you as chair should designate who gets to have that conversation, or I do fear in September we will find ourselves in the same thing. And I naturally think the audit committee, for example, would be a good place to house this conversation, at least the first, crack at it, for example. But I'm fearful unless a group of us is tasked with creating a process, like Karen suggested, we will be doing the same thing come September.
Thank you. And my view on it would either be 2 people, 2 liaisons on it, or it would have to be one of the committees. But I don't know that we can decide that tonight. I don't think that would be productive.
So Leslie and I have just had a side conversation. Since this was generated out of the budget committee to begin with, maybe it should be the budget committee rather than the audit committee, but I leave that to your judgment, just to we wanted to make sure that got on the record.
Thank you.
Can I suggest that the chair make that decision at a later time?
Okay, I think this is what we're
That's what he
approving.
said.
What we're approving is the $15,000 for cost estimator. Additionally, as a condition of that approval, no funds will be spent until the BET takes another vote, okay, on what Karen said is the who's, the what's, the process. And I think kind of going, I mean, I think aligned with a lot of the other comments that all 12 people have made, so that although the money is encumbered, there will be no authorization to spend it, that would be the condition, until we vote again, hopefully in September, on what the, the exact process and more information on what we're really going to ask for. So there's going to have to be a second vote to effectively release the funds. Is that, can we call the question?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Nisha? So we're calling the question on Karen's amendment, that there's a condition for release.
Okay.
Are there any objections to to Karen and David's condition?
Motion.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Motion. Hearing none, that's approved.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
no. Take a roll call.
okay, roll call. Thank you.
Harry Fisher,
I vote yes.
Stephen Selbst,
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
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 Miriam?
Miriam?
Yes.
That's 11-1-0.
Okay, now can we have a vote on the motion as amended?
No, well,
Isn't that what we just did?
it's a
Oh.
replacement motion.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. We saved some time.
Mr. Chair, can I also ask that under new business that we move the acceptance of the first payment of the national opioid settlement to the first discussion item, since we have Commissioner of Human Services here, and I don't want her to...
I do support that. I assume there's no objections? Okay, thank you. So we are moving the last item on new business to the first item. And my apologies, we probably should have thought of that an hour ago. So thank you, Karen.
Report first.
Yes, Karen?
Okay, I'm just going to give the report of the Law Committee, and then I'm going to open it up to the Commissioner. On Wednesday, July 13th, Law Committee members met with Demetria Nelson, Commissioner of Human Services, and Assistant Town Attorney Valerie Mays-Keeney to discuss the nationwide opiate settlements that have been reached to resolve all opioid litigation brought by states and local governments against the three largest pharmaceutical distributors, McKesson, Cardinal Health, and AmerisourceBergen, and manufacturer Janssen Pharmaceutical, Inc., and its parent company, Johnson & Johnson. These settlements provide funds to states and local governments for the abatement of the opioid epidemic across the country. Further details of the settlement were included in your package and in subsequent emails. In December 2021, Greenwich joined the settlement by registering to participate before the January 2022 deadline for registration to participate in the settlement. Under the settlement, the town has learned that we will receive a payment of $24,819.34 for each of 18 successful years. Commissioner Nelson noted that there might be modifications up or down in future years, and the first payment of $24,819.34 is due to be paid on August 2nd for this fiscal year. It should be noted that the Law Committee first discussed this settlement with Commissioner Nelson during the current fiscal year budget discussions earlier this year. Our committee was asked to consider a resolution similar to a resolution for grants, but since the settlement had not yet been finalized and the amount of money to be received by our town was not known, the committee felt we should wait before crafting a resolution. The consensus of the committee then was that we should allow the town to go through one round of settlement payments for this fiscal year and then consider a resolution in the next fiscal year to cover successive payments, which brings us to today. It should also be noted that the acceptance of the money of the BET is not an allocation by the BET of the monies. The controller will, I understand, work with Commissioner Nelson to determine the correct accounts or wherever to park the monies. But Commissioner Nelson has indicated to the committee that she will also be working with the town departments and the Board of Ed to determine what programs require supplemental funds to combat opioid addiction. At that point, it's anticipated she will return to the BET and RTM to allocate the funds, and hopefully this process will be streamlined in the subsequent fiscal years with our resolution. As at our July 13th, the Law Committee committed to prepare a budget resolution during the fiscal year 24 budget discussions. And once the BET approves the acceptance of the monies, which is why Commissioner Nelson is here today, she will then be able to create the town's portal account and complete the paperwork for the monies so that the town can receive the monies. The Law Committee voted 2-0 to recommend that the BET accept the settlement amount of $24,819.34 for fiscal year 22-23, with the condition that the Commissioner of Human Resources return with her proposed allocation of the funds for approval by the BET and ultimately the RTM.
So I have a small point of order to broach with the chair, if I may.
Okay.
I received, and I think that all of us did, but it seemed to be addressed to all of us. In any event, I received an email at 2:26 today from the Finance Department that reads, "Please note, the BET Budget Committee meeting scheduled for today has been canceled as the item on the BET agenda has been deferred." I don't know if a deferral of the item on the agenda has been posted on the website. I think I have this correctly. There's other lawyers, I'm thinking of Karen in particular, who's very good at FOI. I think we can add an item back to the agenda that was on the agenda and deferred by a 2/3 vote. So I guess I have two questions. One, was there a posting that has been deferred? If so, then I'd recommend that we do a motion to restore the item to the agenda and support it with a 2/3 vote. If it was never posted, if the deferral was never posted, I don't think we need to make that motion, but I don't want to just vote on it and approve it without doing something to cover the point of an item that may have been deferred on the postings.
So, Peter, you can confirm, but I did not ask Shira to post that. And I would also say that, if there was, quote, a deferral, since it's on the agenda, it would have required us to use a 2/3 vote to remove it anyway.
Chair opposing?
Yeah, but, right? I mean, I can't unilaterally.
So let's make the motion to restore, worst comes to worst, we're making a needless motion.
I'm checking the website right now.
Did the email come from Shara?
The email came from Shira, yeah, at 2:26 today. I read it. It's the one sentence that I read.
I thought she canceled the budget committee meeting.
She did cancel the budget
She
committee.
She also said in that, there was a budget committee meeting, scheduled for 6:20, 10 minutes before this meeting. And the purpose of her email was to say that that budget committee meeting is canceled. But in it, she says that the item on the BET agenda has been deferred. I don't know what that means.
I don't see it on the, I don't see any notice on the, and I don't think it would meet the 24-hour anyway, if it was posted.
So I'm going to propose a
But
motion.
we can do the
Yeah,
motion.
I'm going to propose a motion that
I think
we
it's
take the item
unnecessary, but we
up
can-
on our agenda. And if that's supported by a 2/3 vote, I think we've met the FOI requirement.
Okay.
I need a second
Okay.
and a supporting vote.
Second.
Okay, that's a motion by Jeff Raymer, seconded by Stephen. Any objections? Yes, Laura.
I just have a question, because our posted agenda has the item as an item of new business, but at the beginning of the meeting, you announced that we were deferring it. So I'm happy to talk about it, but just process-wise, somebody
Yeah,
help me.
I think the reason for the deferral was because we didn't have the appropriation with it. Okay, there was, remember, this whole thing really came up last Thursday, Friday, and so it's all been kind of going real time. And for that reason, but I think that right now we're talking about just the acceptance, okay, of the monies, not the appropriation. So from what I'm hearing, I think it's appropriate that we discuss this and take action on that.
All right, I'm happy to do
Apologies
that.
for the
That's
confusion.
okay. Whatever we need to do is fine.
yeah.
Demetria's here. Let's respect her time.
I'm sorry, this is another point of order, and maybe we should, why are we acting on accepting funds? If the settlement's been, we're not acting to approve a settlement, are we? What's the motion that we're talking about
We're
taking?
not, we can't alter the money, we're just accepting the funds to be able to then register. From what I understand, according to the law department, we need to accept the funds to be able to then register in the portal to be able to receive the payment.
So this is like accepting a
Hold on a
grant?
second. So Demetria,
It basically is like accepting a grant.
Leslie, I'm just
It's a
gonna ask
ministerial
Demetria to
thing.
comment.
Good evening, everyone. So yes, this evening I am here so that we can secure permission to accept the funds into finance for year one of the opioid settlement. We are not at the point where any department is going to be appropriating the funds, but we just want to accept the funds within finance because it is not clear, and it has not been made clear from the state whether or not there is a deadline regarding registering to accept the funds. And we have reached out to them several times, and they said they're in the process of determining that. But we don't want to delay the process of accepting them and then unfortunately lose out on accepting them.
I hate to belabor a point because taking a vote on something that we don't need to vote on doesn't hurt anything, but we didn't vote to accept the ARP grant funds. Like, I don't recall the BET voting to accept money. We vote on,
This is not a grant, it's a settlement, so we have to accept the settlement amount. In other words, we need some sort of approval to accept the settlement amount. It's not, it's similar to a grant, but it's not a grant.
because settlements usually we're paying out as opposed to
Right,
receiving.
exactly. So
Again,
we're getting monies
I'll withdraw
in.
my concern only because taking a vote that isn't necessary doesn't hurt anything, but it's odd situation.
Leslie?
Yeah, Demetria?
Yes.
Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Can you sort of explain to us your email of 409? You said Valerie submitted the documentation for the town to
Need to get the money in.
Register.
participate in, what does it
yes,
say?
To participate
In the settlement. To my
settlement.
knowledge, we have not registered on the portal to receive the year one payout for the distributed settlement. And then you go on, I will forward the portal registration email to you. What exactly does that mean?
Yes, it means that, and I can maybe take about 5 minutes just to review the timeline. It might make everything clearer if I could, or no? Okay. All right, so in October 18, 2021, the first selectman received notice from the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities about the opioid settlement related to Janssen and the parent company Johnson & Johnson and the three major distributors as listed by Karen, but quickly I will re-mention them, McKesson, Cardinal, and Amerisource Bergen. And then on October 20th, 2021, the first selectman's office asked Tyler and myself to be the primary contacts for the opioid settlement. And on October 21st, 2021, we received the registration code from CCM and began to work with the law department to secure approval to participate in the settlement. And then on December 9th, 2021, we presented to the Board of Selectmen for approval for the town to participate in the national opioid settlements. Additional information was requested related to an individual's right to pursue any related lawsuits. And we presented again on December 23rd, 2021 with follow-up information stating that individual lawsuits were permitted. And then it was voted that we could indeed participate as a town in the opioid settlement. And then in March 2020, the Law Department received 2022, the Law Department received updated information about the pending payouts. They received information that the payouts would potentially begin in May 2022. And then on April 13th, 2022, an initial presentation to the BET Law Committee was performed by both Valerie and myself. There was no specific dollar amount available at that time regarding year one allocations. And then on June 29th, 2022, we received updated information from CCM and the state informing us that there had been an exact amount identified for year one of the opioid settlement. And then on July 13th, 2022, a follow-up presentation at the BET Law Committee was conducted by myself and Valerie with a specific allocation amount and a recommendation to seek approval from the BET to accept the funds was made. So now I am here so that we can move forward with that process and register on the portal so that finance can receive the funds.
And Leslie, the portal is to provide information like a W-9 and all the other financial information necessary for them to issue the check to the town. So it's just registering the town to be able to accept the funds.
No, we did not. I know Laura had some questions. So there's a motion to add this item to the agenda, just in case, because there was wording of deferral. That would require a 2/3 vote to pass. Are there any objections to adding this item? Okay, that Jeff's motion passes 12-0.
Can I just add one more thing? We also asked the question as to why the Board of Selectmen doesn't need to approve the acceptance and the Claims Committee. The Claims Committee is charged with settlements that come out of the risk fund, so it's money's going out, not coming in, and the Board of Selectmen has already approved the settlement, the town being in the settlement, so they do not have to approve the monies coming in.
So it's been added to the agenda. Can I get a motion to? Yeah.
He just wants to.
Sorry.
Just say, can we accept the money? Can we vote to accept the money?
So I want to, ask Pete and Roland for you, or Pete and/or Roland. So do we normally vote to accept, and do we vote to accept before we know exactly where we're going to put this? Is that an issue? Roland, you're shaking your head up and down and left and right, but.
All the monies that we receive, that the health department gets, that the police department gets, they get the money and it sits there, and then they come in to spend it with a request for an appropriation. So that'll be the same thing here. Once they decide how they're going to spend it, they'll come in and get the appropriation.
Thank you.
Okay, so Bill's making a motion. I'll second it to move the item. Are there any objections? Okay, hearing no objections, this item is approved 12-0. Thank you, Demetria.
Thank you
And
very
Karen.
much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Commissioner. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is retirement and new business, retirement board, additional full-time employee. And this originally came from the HR committee. Bill, do you want to quickly describe it?
Sure, and you have materials in your package. This is a extension of a part-time person to a full-time person. There's a justification that's kind of a page of explanos there. And this passed our HR committee. I need a little. 3-1. 3-1, thank you, Stephen. So it should be before you from our committee.
Does the dissenting vote want to speak to it?
The chair, yeah.
and also went to Budget Committee. Leslie?
Oh, yes, this passed the Budget Committee by a vote of 3-1-0 also. It was, similar as to what Bill reported.
Any other discussion? Okay.
Does the people who voted with a dissenting vote at either HR or Budget want to speak to the item?
Yeah. Yes, I voted no at HR. I voted no for two reasons. One was a process issue. We now have a form which Miriam Cruiser very kindly put together, where when requests come in, we would understand the numbers, but we would also understand any approvals. At the moment of the vote, this had not been approved by the town administrator. Now, I do want to, and it not at that point been approved by the retirement board itself by a formal vote. So I do want to acknowledge that the town administrator does not have direct authority over the retirement board, but when it comes to costs and head count, et cetera, I mean, clearly the town administrator, does have, at least from my point of view, some input or view on those things. So from a process point of view, I voted no for that reason. Both those issues were subsequently addressed. The retirement board did take a formal vote, and the town administrator ultimately did sign off on this hire. My second reason was that, from a flat headcount point of view, I felt that if we were going to add benefits or add a partial headcount, that we should have either an immediate offset or view that we would get future savings. I can say right now, I don't know offset's been offered, and it isn't clear to me that there's going to be one voluntarily offered. So, the headcount issue is still a concern for me, but the process issue was addressed. Does that answer your question, Jeff?
It does,
Thank you.
I don't know if the dissenting vote, the Budget Committee wanted to speak.
So I was the dissenting vote on the Budget Committee. One of the things that I requested in advance was information on the number of employees, including retirees and active vested employees and the active employees, what they were in June 2011, when there was the last time that there was the second full-time employee for the retirement plan, and compare that number of 2,440 with that number, the most recent numbers, which were June 2021, when that was reduced to 2,153, a decline of 287 employees, therefore approximately 12%. Therefore, obviously, looking at the declining workload of this person. And in addition, I felt budget guidelines basically are recommending flat headcount for the, for our town in fiscal year '23. And again, there was no offset applied, with this employee. This was increasing headcount. And from that standpoint, I felt it was inconsistent with, our budget guidelines, and which sort of continue the spirit of them. Certainly, we all executed that within our budget for fiscal '23. So those are the reasons that I voted no for this at that point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, Nisha, can you call the vote?
I'll start with Miriam on the phone.
Miriam, yes?
Did we have a motion to?
Yeah, it's been moved.
Can she vote?
Yeah, she can.
Bill, you made the motion
The
and,
committee, so it
okay, got it. Laura,
Yes.
Karen,
No.
David,
Yes.
I'm a yes. Dan,
I'm a no.
Leslie Tarkington,
I'm a no.
Leslie Moriarty,
Yes.
Jeff Raymer.
Yes.
yes.
Bill Drake, yes. Stevens.
No.
So I think that's 8-4.
Okay, that motion passes 8-4. Thank you. The last piece of new business is a vote to amend the Opeb IPS or investment policy statement. That came out of the IAC. Chairman Bill Drake.
Everyone knows that our pension fund is managed with discretion by Neuberger Berman, and since January, our Opeb fund has been managed with discretion by Vanguard. And after their installation, they were really invited to offer slight modifications to the investment policy statement of the Opeb, which they've done, and that's what's before you. And Miriam also did good work on this to make recommendations and changes, slight ones, which conform this investment policy statement to that of the pension fund, just for consistency and similarity. So this item passed the Opeb board, which was its first stop, 3-0. That's Pellegrino, Cruiser, and me. It passed the IAC 4-0 and is before you.
Okay, we can do discussion, but I would like to make a comment and then make an amendment. Do I have a second?
Second.
Oh, yeah. Okay, first thing, okay.
hear that first.
Yeah, I'm apologizing. Okay, so, okay.
Delete the whole
Okay.
thing, you never know.
Okay, so, okay, so,
Remove the vice chair.
exactly. Okay, to go home. Okay, I'll try to be really, really brief. First thing, I think, I want to commend the work that was done, and, kind of in terms of kind of conforming this document. I have 3 numerical edits, and the reason for it is, it has been my consistent view in the retirement board and even here that, non-US equity, I am just not generally comfortable with a high allocation of that, and that's been a consistent view I've had. I think, and in that regard, if you go to page 2, well, no, first page 2. Okay, on page 2, if you look at public U.S. equity, these are the target amounts, right? This is the benchmark. It used to be that we had 55% in U.S. equity and 20% in non-U.S. That's what it was originally. The proposal is to take the U.S. equity from 55% to 45%, and to take the non-U.S. from 10 to 30%. Oh, no, sorry, yeah, so 20 to 30, my apologies. I would frankly, personally, vote to keep it under 20, the non-US, but as a compromise, I've suggested, and my motion would be to take the non-US, instead of taking from 20 to 30, to take it to 20 to 25, the US equity, to take it to 50 instead of down to 45. So those numbers would be 50 and 25. So it's really changing the allocation by 5. On the page 3, if the target allocation is 25% for the non-US, I would suggest a max of 30%, which is, I think, ample to allow Neuberger Berman to, have time to rebalance the portfolio. I'm happy to.
So that's your motion.
That's my motion.
And I'm seconding that motion.
Sorry, can I just clarify? It's Vanguard, not Neuberger Berman.
Oh, I'm sorry. It is Vanguard. Yes,
Okay,
my
don't
apologies.
confuse me anymore. Thank
No,
you.
okay.
Miriam has her hand raised.
Oh, Miriam?
Yes, so I would not support that motion and potentially try to convince our chair to make a change, but I'll explain why I don't support that motion. While I don't disagree with Dan on my personal views of international equities being a large part of my own personal portfolio, I think for what we've asked Vanguard to do, which was number 1, take over this portfolio and manage it in the way that they pitched to us. And also, if you look through your packet, there is an entire section on why they suggest a higher allocation to international bonds, which is history shows, mathematics
International
shows, models
Miriam,
show.
international equities.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
International equities. It's very late in Portugal right now. Yeah, so to international equities is all the models show, all of the brains they have working at Vanguard and running all of their models indicate that over the long term, which is what these assets are, they're long-term assets, that international equities, a higher allocation, reduces risk and increases returns. And, in our packet, there's, I think it's called page 5, that from the little packet that came from Vanguard, you see that their estimated returns in 50th percentile. Over the next 30-year time horizon, that there is, above 2.5% that they expect to come over U.S. equities from non-U.S. equities. We hired Vanguard. I do not like the idea of the Opeb board or the IAC having an attribution line item, which is our discretion. And so what I would suggest is if the max number of 40 that is on page 3 is sort of too much, because that is a max of the total portfolio, would be to change that number to 35. If Vanguard wants 30% as part of their benchmark, so they would target, as you all know, they're a passive player. They don't take tactical shifts. It will be at 30%. We want to give them a little room so that if the market, moves up, they're not going against sidelines. So I would suggest keeping it at 30% and having the max at 35% as sort of, my compromise on, 40% being well above their 30% target, and we all know they're passive, so they're not going to get to 40%. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Harry?
Yeah, I'm on the Investment Advisory Committee, and I was one of the 4 that voted to approve it as presented to us. But I was very reluctant in that, and I somewhat regret it. And I would like to support Dan's view. And my comment, which was made at the committee meeting, is that for at least a decade, managers have been recommending significant investment in non-U.S. equities, and it hasn't worked. So to sit here today and say that it's going to work in the future is going against history. So I'm a supporter of Dan's motion.
Okay. Any other, Bill?
I think it's appropriate management principle that decisions of this type should be made by those who are most expert in it and closest to the action. And here what you have is Vanguard, which is a substantial investor, is giving you the data to say this step increases diversification and reduces volatility and conforms to the 39% of non-U.S. equities in the overall equity portfolio. So you have your experts that you hired telling you to do this. You have the next level, the Opeb board confirmed it. You have the next level, the IAC confirmed it. And now you have the 12 of us, for whom this is an interest, but we're not as close to it as all those experts, particularly as to Vanguard, who you're paying to make these decisions. So it's not a management principle that I think we should follow, that the 12 of us should be making this decision when one of the biggest investment firms in the world that you've hired to do this and has the data to do the analysis is telling you that they recommend the opposite. So I'll be voting with the lady from Goldman Sachs.
Thank you, Bill. Leslie?
So I support this motion that Dan made because I also add that U.S. equity has a substantial non-U.S. equity portion ingrained within it. So I think the concentration of non-U.S. is too large, and so I'm supporting this motion.
Any other discussion? Oh, David, sorry.
I think that what Miriam is suggesting, going from 40 to 35, is appropriate. I assume, Bill, you're agreeing with that. My instinct, I don't want to repeat everything, but my instinct was also like Harry's, as you know from the meeting, But I think not ratcheting it down to 35% is adequate. And so that's where I would go.
Okay, Miriam, this is Dan. You know, look, I would prefer to just have a vote on my motion as is. If it fails or succeeds, that's fine. I think, you know, going from 40 to 35, I mean, right now we're 20% on the international, and to go from 20 to 35 instead of 40, to me, isn't really a material difference. So I'd prefer us to just vote, if it's okay with you, my motion on its merits as is, and if it fails, then just, you know, then we go from there. Is that okay, Miriam?
Well, that's the motion that's before us
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, okay, I just want to know, but she was suggesting a potential amendment to mine, so, okay, so, Laura?
Can I just ask, is this a time-sensitive item? I mean, normally I like to go to committee meetings when there's, oh, Karen's getting a score. Normally I like to attend committee meetings when I know there's a substantive issue, and I feel like, you know, trying to glean some of this information from the packet, I missed out by not going to the committee meeting this month. But can anyone tell me, is this time-sensitive?
I don't think it's time sensitive. You're always invited, of course. For my part, I don't think it's important enough to put off a whole month cycle of thinking about it.
It'll be 2 months.
Thank you. 2 months.
So our target is 20% now, and is Vanguard really going to get up to 30% in the next month or so?
Yes.
That's pretty much what they said they did.
That's what they said they do. Okay, thank you.
Good question, though. We talked about that at the committee, but I would concur with Bill and the committee, I think.
Microphone.
We should just do it. And look, I'm sorry. And the fact is, if 6 months from now there's concern, we can always take it up again. I would hope not to have to do that, but I think we should dispose of this issue tonight, is my view. David, you good? Yeah, okay. So can we call the question? Thank you. Yes.
Harry,
I vote yes on Dan's motion.
Stephen?
No.
Bill?
No.
Jeff?
No.
Leslie Moriarty?
No.
Leslie Tarkington?
Yes.
Dan, you're,
Yes.
I'm a yes. David Weisbrod?
No.
Karen?
Yes.
Laura Erickson?
No.
Miriam
Miriam?
Cruiser?
No.
I think it's 5-7, so it does not pass.
Okay, motion fails. Can I get a motion to
So
approve the
Miriam's
item?
motion.
That didn't pass, right?
No.
So I'd move what Miriam said, just to make it easy for her because she's in Portugal.
Yeah, because the figures be repeated for us, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
and what, all her recommendation was, sorry, thank you. Her recommendation was on page 3, where the top of page 3, where you have the min and max, that the max for non-US, instead of the 40%, which is in your package, that it be 35.
Okay, and that, did you second that?
I do.
Okay. Can we go to a vote?
I'm sorry, so, just for clarity, on page 2, the figures are as they appeared in the packets. Thank you.
Okay. So we just changing page 3 from 40 to 35 on the other non-US.
Thank you.
Okay, can we call the vote?
Yep. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Just taking my notes.
Who's turning?
Miriam Cruiser, Bill Drake.
I don't know who, calling the vote?
I'm calling it. 1 second. I'm just making sure I get it right. Harry Fisher,
Yes.
Stephen Selbst,
Yes.
Bill Drake,
Yes.
Jeff Framer,
Yes.
Leslie Moriarty,
Yes.
Leslie Tarkington,
Yes.
Dan Ozismer.
I abstain.
I'm a yes. David Weisbrod.
Yes.
Karen Fasciolotis.
Abstain.
Laura Erickson.
Yes.
Miriam Cruiser.
Yes.
I think it's 10-02.
That amendment passes 10-02, and any objections to approving this as amended? Hearing none, this passes 12-0-0. Okay. I think we're We're at the,
Minute.
you mind if we do the minutes? No, for the chair report? Any objections?
There's one Scrivener's error on the routine applications on PD2. Should be a comma instead of a period, $19,050. Under routine items, PD2.
Number 5.
19,000, he needs a comma.
Dollar amount, okay, thank you. Are these approved? 1200?
No, I think probably Stephen will be abstaining, no? You were present.
Oh, Harry.
No, I'm present. Steve was not present.
Correct, I'm abstaining because I wasn't
So
present.
it's 1101, right?
Yeah.
That's 1101. So Chair's report, I know this meeting went late, so I'll be super brief. All I just really want to say is, this clearly isn't the end of the term, but this is hopefully the start of the summer. And I just want to thank Peter and Roland and his staff and legal and thank all of you. And everyone have a great summer, okay? And hopefully you won't be hearing too much from each other, but I think that might be, sorry, I think that might be a wishful thought, but have a great summer. Thank you all.
I move we adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?